Hey guys, welcome back to Pep Talks. I'm your host, Lexi Cardoza, and today I am joined with two very good friends of mine, Channa and Dyani. Thank you guys so much for being here with me today. It's a very windy day here in Malibu, but are you ready to take your first Pep quiz?
Oh, I didn't know. I didn't study.
I think so.
Okay, amazing. What's the first thing you do when you wake up?
Check my phone.
Yep, that was about to say that.
Okay, and what are you looking at?
My emails.
Ooh.
Yeah.
That's professional. I'm usually on Twitter. I want to see what I missed.
Okay.
Solid.
And Instagram, social media.
Social media?
Yeah.
Okay, last thing you do before you go to bed.
Check my phone.
Yeah, check my phone.
I was like trying to think of something better, but nope. It's check my phone. Yeah.
What is your guilty pleasure?
Ooh.
Like ice cream.
Ice cream. Ooh,
Ice
any
cream.
specific flavor?
Well, I'm dairy free, and I found a really good dairy free option. It's made out of avocados. It's weird.
Is it the Cotto brand? That
Yes,
like Whole
it's
Foods?
really good. It's really good.
Okay, thank you.
I would say maybe like Queer Eye.
Queer Eye. Who's your favorite?
Probably Tan right now.
Okay.
I love the French tuck. I can't. But I will actually like just rewatch the same episode 4 or 5 times because it just makes me feel so good, you know?
I love that. They're just a great group of people.
Yeah.
Okay. Favorite color?
Pink.
Pink.
Pink. Oh, I love
Twins.
pink. Okay, and lastly, my favorite question of them all. What is one thing that you love about yourself?
Oh, that's so cute. That's a great question. Channa, you want to go first?
I would say, this feels weird, but I would say I'm driven.
Okay,
Yeah.
great quality.
I would say my resilience, I think. Yeah.
Amazing. Okay, well, I'm so glad you guys are here with me today. You're in my outdoor living room. Get comfortable. So, how are you guys doing? How's your week been?
I can't even say it's been chill. It's been very hectic. But it's a good way to end my Saturday, I think.
Yeah, no, I've had a great week. I'm part-time, so things are kind of hectic just because I work with the newspaper and that's
Always
constantly-
kind of.
Yeah,
Yep.
it's never ending, but I love that. It very much energizes me, so.
Great. Well, today we are on our episode on addiction and kind of how it affects everyone involved, why we kind of run to substances for comfort, and it also happens to be National Collegiate Alcohol Awareness Week, so there's no better time to dive deep into this conversation. So, could you guys tell me a little bit about your experience with addiction?
So my dad has struggled with alcoholism since before I was born. So from the time before I was born to maybe like 4th grade, he was drinking very frequently. And then he was able to get sober from like 5th grade to my senior year of high school. And then from my senior year of high school to now, which is my junior year in college, it's been very on and off. So that's kind of what our situation's been like.
Okay.
Yeah.
Me personally, I wouldn't say I've felt that in any other sense than maybe caffeine. I very much have a strong need for it. If I don't have it in the morning, I'll have such a horrible headache. But never any, I guess, quote unquote hard drugs. But it's always been something I've been interested in because I feel like it's such a uncomfortable, taboo topic that because I don't really know much about it, I would like to.
Mm-hmm. Well, I feel like, yeah, kind of like your situation. I have a very similar experience. My dad struggled from addiction also before I was born. And I feel like it's one of those things that you're always, even if you're recovering, you're always in recovery. And it's kind of like a lifelong journey. Like, I feel like once an addict, you're always an addict. But kind of growing up in that environment where it's kind of like always the unknown, it's uncertain. Like, we don't really know, like, what's going to happen. Like, is he going to drink one day? Is he going to drink another day? Because I think what a lot of people don't realize is they're not necessarily drunk or high all day, every day. It's kind of a thing of like, maybe one day they are, but one day they're not. Like, I know in my own personal experience, it was very like, he'd go a week or two being completely fine, everything was good, we would do things that we all kind of loved as a family, but then there'd be times when something triggered him or there was something happening in his life where he felt he needed that drink, and then he would kind of go off on like a binge for a few days, but then it was back. And so I feel like that kind of creates this level of like uncertainty of like what's going to happen next. Dyani, did you ever kind of feel that in your situation?
Oh, absolutely. I feel like it's just this constant state of being on unstable ground where it's like you don't really know what step you can take. You don't know if you're moving like 3 steps forward or 5 steps back. You don't know what the day is going to hold. So I think for me, I've just always tried to like distance myself from it. So my dad and I have I wouldn't say we have like a bad relationship. I think we just have a very like unstable relationship. So our relationship kind of depends on his levels of sobriety. And of course, I'm sure you understand like that situation where it's like you know that it's really good and you're like really excited that it's really good, but there's a part of you that's scared and like apprehensive.
Yes.
So it's like there's always that sense of love, but it's always love, but almost like at arm's distance. Yeah.
Exactly. And I feel like since it is so like kind of unknown, there's always these unknowns. It's like the highs I feel like are even higher because when you're having a good moment with them and when you're really like able to like see them for who they truly are, I think it makes it even more difficult though when they are at that low. But also it's kind of like finding that balance of like how do I kind of move forward with this relationship? Because of course these are our parents, we want to have relationships with them, but I feel like sometimes you're kind of forced to distance yourself because if you don't, they just like kind of suck you right back in. Was your dad like ever very like reliant on you? Like kind of what was your like position like in his life?
I wouldn't say he was very reliant on me. I think he was very aware that when he was drinking to kind of keep his distance, and even when he's in recovery, he will kind of keep his distance. It's when he's like sober that it's those steps he tries to take to kind of like mend a relationship when he starts like trying to come back into my life. And I appreciate that when I know that that situation is going to be stable. But when it's not, I think we both kind of just keep our distance.
Okay.
So it's never been anything where I feel like I'm in an uncomfortable situation because I feel like my dad relies on me when he drinks because I don't think he ever did.
Okay. And so how was his relationship with your mom? Was there anything there that kind of was affected by the alcoholism?
We honestly don't really know what triggers it. It kind of happens very randomly. I've honestly tried to like keep track of dates when it seems like it might, and honestly we never really know what triggers it. So I think my mom always tries to be very supportive. So we have a lot of help from like family members who will kind of like take him in, try to like talk some sense into him. So it really just depends on like the situation and the timing, really like who is involved. Yeah.
And so how is this like living in a home with addiction, how has it kind of shaped your journey, shaped the way you view yourself? Did it have any effect on that aspect of your life?
I definitely have to remind myself that like my dad's addiction doesn't define me, but it has shaped me into who I am. And I think for me, it's like not saying my dad's an addict, but saying he struggles with an addiction. Because I think when you put that label on it, it creates a stigma even for yourself. And even when you explain to people like what you're going through, they kind of see it in a different light based on how you word it.
Yes.
So me kind of like taking that switch from being, oh, my dad's an alcoholic to, oh, my dad struggles with alcoholism, that's kind of helped in my own recovery in that situation. So I feel like for me, it makes me very cautious of who I let into my life. It makes me very cautious when I'm in situations that involve alcohol. And I think for me, it makes me appreciate my friends a lot more because I didn't talk to many people about this. This is like a really big step for me to be here right now talking about this very publicly. I called my mom before I agreed to do this, and she said, are you ready for like your entire school to know?
Yeah.
And I thought to myself, like, I don't think I'm ever going to be ready, but if speaking out on my own experience can help someone feel like they're not alone in theirs, I think that's the best situation for me.
Yeah, and I feel like it is a really like big leap to take. I know for me personally, it took me like 20 years to ever even tell a single person what I was going through, because when these issues and things are stigmatized, when people view addiction as being a bad thing and as a choice, it just immediately kind of puts you in this uncomfortable and weird position of like, oh, well, what are they going to think about me if they know my dad's an addict? How are they going to treat me differently? Are they going to be different around me? And for me, like that was always my biggest fear, is I didn't want to be seen as the child of an addict. I wanted to be seen as normal, but at the end of the day, like the life I was living wasn't normal, and I feel like stigma results in a lot of shame, and we shouldn't be ashamed of things that are completely out of our control. And I feel like for the addict, it's out of their control, but also for the people surrounded, it is extremely out of your control for what you're living with. And I feel like it's so important to really kind of like educate people on addiction and what addiction really is, so then when people feel more comfortable opening up about something, that isn't viewed as bad. And so Channa, you did an amazing special edition on drugs in the graphic. Could you tell us about that, kind of your inspiration behind it, and why you really wanted to take that leap and try to do something kind of that we haven't really seen much of before?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely not Pepperdine standards, but the whole idea came about after I was getting coffee with one of my friends, and we were just talking and ended up talking for 2 hours about drugs. And that's something that neither of us are from a community where that is very prevalent. But it was more just, we were so curious about it, and she had taken a class about different pharmaceutical drugs, and just her telling me about it all, I was like, this is something that we should all know about and care about. And like one of the reasons is it affects so many more people than we think. Like for example, you two, we focus a lot about how can we help people who struggle with addiction, but what about their support system? Like, did y'all have any support system when you were going through this, or?
I don't think my support system came until I decided it was time to open up to my friends about it, and that was like my senior year of high school.
Yeah.
And that was when, at that point, I was out of that situation because my dad was staying with his own parents in Las Vegas. I'm from like Southern California, for reference. But so it was when I decided, okay, maybe it's time that my friends understand maybe why I'm not completely 100% okay. Maybe it's time that they know. I think that's when that was the first time I ever felt like I had a support system outside from like my mom. And that was really big for me, because in your senior year of high school, you're trying to figure out like, what am I going to do for the rest of my life? But when you have the situation in like your own backyard, it's really hard to kind of remember yourself and not the other people in your life that may be struggling.
Yeah, and it's like really hard because I feel like in these situations you feel so alone because you feel like you can't open up. So then you just bottle it up, and now you're dealing with something huge all by yourself. And then you have to kind of go around pretending that, oh, everything's fine. I feel like it's kind of like this, it's a very isolating experience when we're not open, because now we're dealing with these things by ourselves. And I know like in my situation, it was really hard with family-wise, because of course like we were open about it to our family and to his family, but it's another thing of like they're in denial. Nobody wants to see somebody that they love struggling with something. They don't want to admit that, oh, he's an alcoholic, he has a problem, because once again, when it's stigmatized, it's seen as a problem and it's seen as a bad thing, so nobody wants to admit to it happening. And so for us, like, we didn't really get a ton of support, I guess, from my dad's side especially, because they were more like, they love him, like that's their brother, their son, and of course they want to support him. But so for us, that was kind of like, oh, well, like this is an issue, like this is a big thing happening in our life, and it's really affecting all of us, yet we don't have your support because you don't believe it or you don't want to believe it. And I feel like that's kind of why educating people is, I think, one of the most important things. So once we all get it, then you don't have to fully understand it. I feel like you'll never fully understand addiction unless you've personally experienced it. But I feel like if you get it, at least you can empathize and kind of get where somebody's coming from. And then I think if you're able to get it, you're going to be more receptive when they come and talk to you. And then I feel like everybody will feel better, and slowly we can kind of chip away at the stigma, because more people will be willing to kind of come forward about their struggles with addiction, because it does affect so many more people. And like, not only does it just affect like me, but it affects my friends and people who are in my life, because now I view relationships differently. I view things very differently. So when I take this into other relationships, everything's affected, and I feel like it's a cycle that's like always going, because it's never broken. And so now I'm like in this friendship, and it's not the same because I'm not open and I'm not truly being who I am. And I think that's a huge focus that a lot of people kind of don't even see. And I feel like for me, I never even saw it for a long time. I kind of went along, and slowly I saw, oh, this is like really affecting me negatively. Like, I wonder why.
Yeah.
So I feel like that's kind of how my experience has been with the whole not being open about it.
I love what you said, just like you can never fully understand it, because I don't think like they're trying to make you understand where they're coming from, but just even being aware that you don't fully understand is so important. So it's a really, really great point. Yes.
And so what did you like take away from the, like, what were some of the main things that you kind of learned or like really shined light on when it comes to addiction and the special edition?
Yeah, well, I learned that some people like in the newsroom were suffering either like personally or knew someone, and just we had one of our staff members come up to me before the thing was even printed, and he was like, I am so grateful that you did this, because, you know, I was at this rehab center and it affected me so much, and at Pepperdine it's like everyone's happy and smiling and your life is perfect because you're by the beach in Malibu and stuff, and that's just not the truth at all.
No.
Like, so many students suffer with trauma and loneliness and things that cause people to turn to different types of drugs. So seeing that someone who I know super well, and I didn't know this huge part of him, like that, I just remember like going into my car and like breaking down and crying because I was so like happy in a weird way that I had done something that made me feel like, I don't know, important or good, or I don't know. It was just like a really cool thing to see. But I learned a lot about various different drugs that I didn't know about. I learned a lot about Adderall and marijuana, and then more extreme things like cocaine and heroin. But I just think the whole process was so humbling, and especially reaching out to the experts who were not afraid to talk about it, and they were like, we're so glad that you're putting this on a college campus where a lot of this information could probably be used.
Yes, and I feel like I kind of want to like focus a little more on like the whole Adderall, marijuana, and maybe juuling, because I feel like these aren't really viewed as addictions, but I feel like we talked a little bit in our previous conversation about how maybe they're not addictions, but how they can lead to other things, and how people don't really see that because maybe they are addicted to nicotine. So being on the juul is a step back, but how overusing that still can have a lot of consequences.
Yeah, there's like the whole term of like gateway drugs, like, oh, it can lead to like more intense drugs. But the truth is, even if you're abusing a really seen as like a soft drug, that can still be, just as addictive. I remember in high school growing up, and people were like, you can't like overdose on marijuana, like it's not addictive at all. So there'd be like the stoner kids and stuff, and everyone was like, oh, they're fine, like there's not doing any harm to anyone. But it was really interesting too, especially growing up with friends who, smoked weed and stuff. And personally, like I've always been very for it because I've seen all of the medical benefits it can do. Even the council member in Malibu opened up about how he was in a really bad mountain biking accident and had to go on opioids to deal with the pain. And after 10 days, addicted. And he talked about how that affected his family. It was really, really hard to get off them, but actually the medicinal marijuana helped with that. So I'm very, very for it. But it was interesting that a lot of the people who use it are maybe, high schoolers, middle schoolers, people where their brain is still developing. So when a kid who starts maybe in 7th grade starts smoking it more and more, and then by the time he graduates, he's doing it, morning, evening, night. Like he needs it to fall asleep, he needs it to do whatever, but then that's when it becomes an addiction. It can lead to insomnia, shaking. It has no correlation with benefits to mental health. It actually is shown to hurt it, which especially like with such vulnerable age groups, that can really affect it. So that was just like, I don't know, I think we kind of think it can do no wrong, but it's like maybe it should be treated more like alcohol, where in moderation it could be okay.
Yes.
But we don't really want to say that. Especially like you don't want to tell a kid like in moderation it's okay, because you don't want them to do it.
Exactly.
But by just avoiding saying that altogether, then you're just not opening that dialogue for them to be like, well, I smoke it, but like, should I be doing it constantly? And like it's scary for them to ask that because they don't want to be judged.
Exactly. But I feel like it is so important to kind of open that conversation of like educating people on drugs, what's healthy and what's not, because I feel like we're better off telling somebody it's more okay in moderation than just kind of like keeping quiet and saying nothing, and then they kind of experiment on their own or they do their own things, and then it could lead to things going way worse than if we kind of just had the open dialogue. And I think once we start to like kind of stop seeing drugs as such a bad thing, we'll be more open to just like talking to our kids or talking to our friends or classmates about the harms, the dangers, but also the good things that do come out of it. Because I know for my dad, a lot of his drug addiction kind of started, he broke his back and he had to get a lot of surgeries, and so now he's on pain medication, and obviously he needed to numb the pain, get rid of the pain, and so he took that, but then immediately it turned into an addiction that kind of just spiraled out of control. And I feel like this kind of goes into this whole thing of addiction as a choice, and I know there's like a lot of controversy going around it, and kind of that's a very major stereotype when it comes to addiction of how it's a choice. And I was in a class and I had to do research on this, and one thing that I found that I feel like for me was really eye-opening, because I feel like we don't view it this way, is kind of how addiction isn't a choice, but how our choices can lead us to developing an addiction. And they compared it to skin cancer, and how skin cancer is, some people get it, some people don't, but their choice to expose themselves to high amounts of sun can lead to the addiction, or not to the disease, but not everybody's gonna get it. And I feel like with addiction, some people are wired in different ways than others, to where if I drink, I'm totally fine, but with my dad, when he drinks, it's just out of control. And I feel like that's another thing to really kind of focus on, because it's more than just a choice. And I think when we view it as a choice, it's easier to stigmatize it, because it's like, oh, well, they're choosing to drink, they're choosing to do this, but at the end of the day, that's not really the case. And has that like kind of mindset really affected kind of how you view addiction, or how people kind of view addiction in general, in your guys' opinion?
I think for me, it's always a fear when I tell people that my dad struggles with alcoholism. I'm just scared that they see it as him not being a responsible father, when that's not the case. Like, he's made choices and he's been through experiences that I probably don't even know or understand, that have put him in a place where that's his coping mechanism. And is it the healthiest coping mechanism? No. But that's the coping mechanism that he deals with. So I think for me, it's just like the fear that people not being educated on addiction, how it works, they don't truly understand my situation. They just
Mm-hmm.
think, oh yeah, like your dad chooses to do that. That's
Yeah.
so sad. I'm sorry.
Which is,
But that's not the case.
yeah, it's like,
yeah.
who really, like, obviously there's probably some people who choose not to be parents, but I feel like when addiction's involved, like, they're not choosing to drink. Like, for me, it was always kind of hard. It's like, oh, like, he chooses alcohol over his family, which just made me feel a lot worse, because it's like, oh, like, he'd rather be out drinking, but, like, that isn't the case. And I feel like it took me kind of educating myself and understanding the disease more to really be like, no, like, he actually has a problem. Like, obviously he's had traumatic experiences in his life. He's gone through a lot, and I feel like a lot of times people don't take the time to understand what those people went through and kind of their genetic makeup, their personal history with it. Like, I know his dad was an alcoholic, and I feel like it's one of those things that can really, like, it's part of our genes too that I feel like we don't really focus on a lot. But I feel like another thing is, like, a lot of people, I feel like, run to substances for comfort. I know so many people who are always talking about how they want to just drink to numb the pain, and they want to do whatever to numb the pain, and I feel like that's just a very unhealthy way to think, because it's only these are all like temporary solutions rather than actual like solutions that are really going to help you. But I feel like it's just sometimes that's just an easier way to think than being like, oh, I'm actually going to be open about what I am going through. I want to deal with what I'm going through. It's like, oh, this is just the easy way out. And I feel like that's just another difficult thing to kind of navigate.
And I think that college students do that too.
Mm-hmm.
I definitely, like, being completely honest, have done that a few times, where last year one of my sister's friends died, and, like, I didn't want to talk about it with anyone because it was way too, like, it was just like finals were going on, and I didn't really want to be like an extra stressor to anyone's life. And sometimes you just feel like that burden, like you don't want to have to like put that on someone else, because then like what can they say to make something better? You really can't say much.
Yeah.
So I ended up going out with friends, and it was just like a brunch or whatever, and I ended up over drinking, definitely. And I think it was driven by a sense that I just wanted to feel like I could have fun with my friends rather than talk about something that I wanted to hold deep inside. Yes. So I feel like even for people who may not yet be addicted or classified as an addict, it can still be a coping mechanism, and that's definitely not a good route to go down, no.
Yeah, I feel like it's really hard, because I feel like even when I was like abroad or some other times in my life when I was feeling really down, but of course, like, I still have a very exuberant personality. I like to have fun. I like to be with my friends, but I was just feeling so bad about myself, and I didn't want to talk about it, so I turned to alcohol. Oh, well, if I drink, at least like I'll be really excited for the night. But then it's like you wake up the next morning and you're just kind of, you're in the same place that you were the night before. And I feel like it's hard to find those very like more healthy routes to kind of dealing with your problems, because alcohol, I feel like it's there, it's easy. Getting high, smoking, whatever you want to do, it's easy. And I feel like that's kind of what draws us to it. Yeah, it's not right, but it's easy. And I feel like at the end of the day, when you're feeling uncomfortable, we'll kind of run to the first thing we can see to make us feel comfortable.
Yeah.
So Channa, for you, what was the most rewarding part of writing the article? And I saw, like, of course, on social media, like, it was very publicized. People were really like, they were really into it. Like, did any other people besides the one friend you mentioned kind of share how it impacted their lives, or what was the rewarding for you from that experience?
Yeah, so obviously, like, getting something from the printers is so exciting. Seeing it in its physical form was really cool. But about a month after we printed it, we had a combo event. So it was a town hall that we invited all students to come to. We could get combo credit, and we had a panel of actually all students, no faculty.
Oh, wow.
There was Elijah from the Unite PEP movement. We had someone from SGA. We had other student leaders, someone from Panhell. Greek groups are usually tied with alcohol and drugs. And we just had a very, very open conversation. It was a Q&A. I prepared some questions, but students could also ask some questions. And it was interesting because at first, like, after I finished with my questions, you could tell there was hesitation to go and dive deeper. But then being in a room where it's mostly students and it's a student panel that you're asking, people really opened up, and they were really curious about, like, I can drink abroad and I come back and it's weird, I feel uncomfortable that I can't drink on campus. Or how someone asked about pregnancy and alcohol, which was interesting, and that was actually one of our articles, so we had a writer speak to that. But it was just so cool to see students get to do something that they might not feel like they can do on Pepperdine's campus. Not drugs, but talk about still a dry campus. But yeah, that was really, really rewarding just to have that dialogue, because that was the whole point of the magazine, was to start
the conversation.
Yeah.
Yep.
And yeah, I loved it.
Well, I'm so glad that you kind of took that leap and you kind of did something that probably even made you uncomfortable at times, but I feel like just starting that conversation just immediately makes people feel more open to kind of discussing it in their own lives. And I'm sure like a ton of people probably like really resonated with it, but didn't even really come to you, because I feel like for me at least, I relate a lot to kind of like what other people go through and like the words that they say. And I know even reading this, like I immediately, especially on the living with a loved one with addiction, that specifically, like I immediately clicked. Like so many of the people they shared a little bit about their story, and it's like there are other people, and I feel like just creating something like that, you kind of create a community where we can find some comfort in, because we can find comfort in these other people who have also gone through it, and like immediately we feel less alone, which I feel like is huge. So thank you so much for doing that and creating something that truly was amazing, and I think definitely impacted way more people than you probably even know.
Thank you. It was
course.
cute. Even former president AKB had emailed me and he was like, I'm rethinking my engagement with coffee. And I was like, I mean, I'm trying to too, but like,
Yeah.
So that was nice.
That's so nice. And I know that must feel good for you too, because I feel like creating something that people really take to is just, it's an amazing feeling. Yeah. And so for you, Dyani, what was the greatest lesson you, I guess, learned, or like what did you really take away from kind of living with an addict?
I think for me, it's just like, again, going back to what I said earlier, is like I really don't like to call my dad an addict. I feel like that is such a stigmatized word, and it's something that I think through education can be eliminated. And I think for any addiction, I think you need to remind yourself that they're not just an addict, they're not just an alcoholic, they're not just like a hard drug user, they're a person. And I feel like by changing the way that we label that, it creates more of a power in the way that we help them.
Yes.
And I think separating themselves from their disease, I think I always used to think of it as like two different people, like my dad and then my dad who is drinking. And I think for me that helped in my own recovery process, is like being able to compartmentalize my situation and the two different sides of my dad. So I think for me that's been like the biggest thing I've learned, is to like see my dad as himself, not as the drug that he chooses, you know?
And I feel like it's really, really important to kind of view these people as humans, because at the end of the day, they're humans. We all deal with shit, and people just kind of deal with it differently. And that's something that honestly should be celebrated, because their lives are difficult too. Like they're dealing with something I doubt they want to be dealing with it. And I feel like that's something we really need to remember, is they're more than their disease, they're more than the addiction, they're more than whatever they choose to kind of seek comfort in. They're a human who's gone through stuff, who's lived a life, and ultimately this is how their lives going. And I feel like too, to really celebrate people who have dealt with this disease and who are in recovery, because I feel like that's a huge thing too, is even when they're in recovery, they're still kind of viewed as being without addiction. But I feel like that is such like a huge thing, to be able to kind of get the help that you need and really focus on you, because it isn't easy, and they're amazing people too. And I feel like for me, like kind of viewing my dad in a different way of, you know what, he's trying, he's getting the help he needs, I feel like was a huge thing for me, kind of moving away from seeing it as being stigmatized or even seeing it as being a bad thing, because I don't view it as a bad thing. I view it as, he's my dad, I love him, and it's sad that this is how he has to live, but at the end of the day, that's it. But yeah, you guys, this was an incredible conversation. Thank you so much for being here with me and kind of opening up about your truths. I'm sure people will be able to resonate with this and really relate, and it's really incredible for us to be able to have this conversation and have the platform to speak our truths, so thank you for that. Okay, you guys, we're ending the episode, but can you give your best pep talk to either maybe somebody in a vulnerable situation, somebody who maybe kind of wants to seek comfort in a way that maybe isn't the healthiest? Just give them your best pep talk.
You are so much bigger than what you are currently struggling with. It does get better. Seek help from friends, from family, from loved ones. If you don't feel comfortable with doing that, keep a diary, keep a journal. Don't bottle it all in. I have in the past. Just remember that it does get better with the help and with people that love you. So.
Okay. I would say that you should never feel embarrassed to reach out to someone, no matter what you're going through, what you want to experiment with or try. I think that you should find someone who you can talk to, whether that's a counselor or a friend or a parent. Going through and talking about it is going to be way better than just dealing with it by yourself. So.
Amazing. Well, thank you guys so much for watching, and we'll see you next week.